whose name means God is my king. Her husband, Milan, means sickly. And her brother-in-law, Chillen, means pining, which says that there is a decline mentally and physically. Her story comes to us because her father-in-law and her mother-in-law, who is God is my king, and her mother-in-law, Pleasantness, were residing in the land of Bethlehem, that means house of bread. And there was a famine in Bethlehem that caused them to make a choice to go to the land of Moab. Teaches us that no matter where you are in life, even when you are righteous and upright, God is my king. You're in the house of bread, and you're receiving and experiencing pleasantness. Life has a way with its vicissitudes, not because of anything you've done wrong, of causing you to have to detour. And they made the wrong decision, which led to sorrow. So we saw Ruth in chapter 1 after her father-in-law, Elimelech, had died. After her husband, Milan, had died, her brother-in-law, Chillen, had died, leaving her sister-in-law, Oprah, and her mother-in-law, Naomi, all as widows. Naomi decided that she was going to return back to Bethlehem, where there was once again bread at the house of bread. But she said to her daughter-in-laws, Oprah and Ruth, you all stay here and resume your way of life. Now you must know, if you don't know, that Moab is a land that practiced paganism and idolatry. But Oprah said, all right, fine with me, see ya. And Ruth declared that she would renounce because of her sorrow. She says to her mother-in-law at the close of chapter 1, where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people. Your God shall be my God. Where you die, I will die. Where you are buried, I will be buried. And if anything but death shall separate me from you, may God deal with me harshly. Naomi, when she arrives back into Bethlehem, she looks different than she did when she left. They looked at her and asked her, Naomi, is that you? She said to them, don't call me Naomi anymore. I renounce to be known by that name. I'm renaming myself because God took me out full, but He brought me back in empty. So call me Myra for the rest of my days, which means bitterness. When we got to chapter 2, we saw another cameo of Ruth. Chapter 1 showed us she was renouncing in sorrow. Chapter 2 told us that by the providence of God, she found the field of Boaz, the very man whom God had providentially arranged to be her kinsman redeemer. She didn't get an email, she didn't get a telegram. It was just the providence of God led her to the right field of the right man. And we saw her in service reaping. Last week in chapter 3, she's laying at the feet of Boaz, asking him, claiming him, will you be my kinsman redeemer? So because of her surrenderance, she was resting. So today, as we pick up in chapter 4 of this Ruth series 4.0, this amazing love story, we see that Ruth has come all the way from Moab to Bethlehem. We see that she is seated now in the heart and the home of Boaz. That's amazing because we at one time were strangers away from God, without hope in this world. But now we have been brought nigh by the blood of Christ. And today we are in God's family, we are in God's heart, and someday soon we will be in his home. What a glorious, wonderful prospect of someday being with him, especially when we are going through hell on earth in this pandemic right now. To know that there is a glorious, wonderful prospect that someday, one day, we'll overcome. Well, when we look at this particular chapter, we see that Boaz is at work. Heretofore, we've only seen Boaz standing aside with his arms folded. But now Ruth has claimed him as her kinsman redeemer, so he's free to move. Jesus Christ died on the cross of Calvary for you. Yes, sir. And he died for me. He went through hell for you and for me. And today he is standing, knocking at the door of the hearts of men, saying, behold, I stand at the door and knock. And if any man hear my voice and will open the door, I'll come in unto him and will sup with him and he with me. Revelation 3:20. You see, he won't crash the door. He won't kick it in. You've got to invite him and open and let him in. He has had this amazing eternal gift of salvation. But by faith, we must reach out our hands and receive him. Oh yes, you got to receive him. And because he loves us, he redeems us. And so it is when we come to these 22 verses. Here's the outline. I'll give it to you and you can preach it on your way home. In these 22 verses, we see Ruth receiving. Verses 1 through 6 shows us the summons. The summons is in two parts. Part 1 of the summons, Boaz meets the other family member, the other kinsman, and 10 businessmen of town at the city gate. Verse 1 through 5, he gives us the kinsman's rights. He explains and informs to the kinsman that he has the first chance to buy Elimelech's land. He is a closer relative of Elimelech and Naomi and Ruth than he is. Apparently, he is Elimelech's brother, whereas Boaz at best is a cousin of the deceased husband of Ruth. So he says, the law says, you have first chance at buying the land of Elimelech and the deceased husband of Ruth. So the man is interested, but he doesn't want to endanger losing his own estate. Boaz, after telling him of his rights, reminds him that the buyer must marry Ruth. This man, though he knows of Ruth, he does not love her to the point that he wants to jeopardize losing his own estate. So we see the rights of the kinsman 1 through 5. We see the refusal of the kinsman, verse 6. He declined to buy the land because he does not want to endanger losing his own estate. Then verse 7 through 12 shows us the symbol. He tells Boaz, you can have it. I'll let you have it. I'll decline. And he validates the transaction by giving Boaz his sandal. It was the custom in the law that if the clothes closest person to redeem the land, to be the kinsman redeemer, declined the opportunity, they could be sued and would lose their shoes. So he gave Boaz the right to buy the land, and to stand by his decision, gave her the shoe. I'm trying to imagine this law. It was a strange law. Thank God that some things are transitional or foundational, but not transitional. Because I can imagine if I lived in such a time as that, and my brother was going to marry somebody, that if she didn't have any children when he died, I had to take her on as my wife and have children by her. When he told me he was courting somebody, I would say, I need to see her. I need to see who is this woman. I need to see what she looked like, because I'm going to get sued if she doesn't look up to par. And so this brother declined and gave the right to Boaz. And now we see verse 13 through 17, the son. The son is seen in two parts. Number one, the fruitfulness of Ruth is in verse 13. Ruth marries Boaz, give Boaz a son. Verse 14 through 17 shows us the faithfulness of God. The town women says to Naomi, you might well come on out, girl, and drop this Myra stuff. You claim you're bitter. Look at God. Don't you see how good he is to you? Now that the land has been redeemed, not only does your daughter-in-law have the inheritance back, but you got it too. Verse 18 through 22 is the summary. This marvelous divine plan of God calls Ruth and Boaz to be the grandparents of David. I wish y'all could see this. Come on, Pastor. And so here, Boaz is in the capacity of the kinsman redeemer. As he's in this capacity now, Ruth is to wait and let him make all of the transaction. He now steps out in the open and claims Ruth to be his wife. And as he steps out in the open, it does not matter to him that he's jeopardizing everything he has and everything he is. Why? Because he wants her. Why? Because he loves her. What a picture of Christ. Somebody ought to be able to connect the dots. Because Christ loved us, he took on the flesh of mankind, and of course without sin, and redeemed us, because that's the message of this book. Redemption is a romance. Because God loves us, he redeemed us. That's why I sing the song, oh how I love Jesus, because he first loved me. Now I want to pack some nuggets and we'll go home and have some chicken, greens, black-eyed peas, and hot water cornbread. So it is that the prophetical message of this book is in chapter 1. Israel is outside of the will of God. And God began to deal with this Moabite woman named Ruth. Just as today, God is calling out from among the Gentiles, that's us, a people for his name. Acts 15 and 14. Note that it is not until after the wedding of Ruth that Naomi gets her blessing. Just like it will not be until after the bride, the church, is united with Christ, that Israel will someday be restored and blessed. That's the prophetical message of the book. The typical message of the book is Boaz is a picture of Christ. Because just like he loved and redeemed Ruth and was willing to risk it all, Christ came from heaven above, from message of the book. The practical message of the book is that it's dangerous and detrimental to be a backslider, because backsliding can cost you everything. Backsliding cost, yes, Naomi, her husband, and her son. But I think I ought to tell you the safest place for the people of God is always in the will of God. It's better to be in a storm with God than to be on dry land without God. And so the typical, the practical lesson of this book, Ruth's future was decided in chapter 1. Had she chosen to stay in Moab and lead a life of paganism and idolatry, just like Oprah, she would have been wiped from the story. She would have faded into the abyss. We would have heard of her name no more. But because of her decision to say, I choose the God of Israel, God used this outcast, this Moabitess woman, made her an ancestress to Christ. And if we keep reading the story in Matthew 1:3-6, we'll discover that not only is Ruth a part of the ancestry of Christ, but to show you something about the grace of God, so is Tamar and Bathsheba. I wish I had somebody. If you read up on the story of Tamar, she slept, with a father-in-law. If you read up on the story of Bathsheba, she slept with King David. But I think I ought to tell you, you don't worry about your mistakes because you're human enough to make them, but be, human enough to learn the lesson from them. But when folk run their mouth, God can take a mess and make a miracle out of it. I'm almost too happy to close this thing, but I must close by telling you, my Lord, the book opened with a funeral in chapter 1.